"15 years ago, Jim O'Neill, the then chief economist at Goldman Sachs, wrote a paper entitled Building Better Economic BRICS. And with that paper, he introduced a brand new acronym, the BRICS, into the investment vernacular. That acronym would encapsulate 4 very important countries: Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And I don't think he had any sense and imagined how that would catch an excitement of many people, including the BRICS themselves. It's important to note that when he did that, he did not include South Africa in the BRICS at all. And in fact, he's on record as saying that South Africa did not deserve to be one of the BRICS. But all of that changed in 2010, when South Africa was invited by China to join the BRICS. And China is the big C at the end of the day within the BRICS. So this is potentially a huge event in the life of South Africa. Now, I happen to love acronyms, and I also love to travel. So here was an opportunity to combine the two together. What could be better? And there were so many important questions that I felt needed to be answered. Why South Africa at all? Why not another larger and much more important country? Nigeria, Indonesia perhaps? And what would the implications be for our country, for Africa, and indeed for all the emerging markets? How could South Africa stand up to these much bigger BRICS, some of which are renowned to be bullies? And how could South Africa punch above its weight? And would it be wise to even attempt to do so? Because if you get into a boxing ring with someone bigger than you, they can hurt you very badly. But there were many other questions as well. How would those 3 often sparring and aspirant superpower Asian countries work together? And then finally, what about higher purpose? Did the BRICS bloc have one at all, or was it just an anti the West, anti America, anti the World Bank? So many questions with so few answers. I simply had to know more. And in addition to these very important questions, these were unbelievably exotic and fantastic countries, and yet ones that were less known, less traveled, and definitely less understood. As a combined unit, the BRICS together account for 3.1 billion people. That's 40% of all the people on the planet. And in terms of economic power, as measured by GDP, they totaled over $16 trillion. That's more than 5 times the next competing acronym called the MINTS: Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey. And if you add them all together, they were equal in power, economic might, to the massive United States of America. So these countries have a true global impact, and South Africa was now one of them. And so a professional journey ensued to research and visit all these countries in turn, and try answer some of the many questions that I had posed. The journey would take myself and other colleagues 2.5 times around the circumference of the Earth over a period of 2.5 years. But there was much more that appealed as well. How many people amongst us have been privileged to visit all of those 5 countries? China and India, such glamorous and exotic countries with over 5,000 years of recorded history, and which 2,000 years ago used to dominate the world's economies. 70% of all GDP came from them, with in fact India being the bigger. Just how had these Asian giants lost their ways? And who cannot honestly say amongst us that you've never dreamt of visiting the likes of the Kremlin and Peterhof's Palace, the Great Wall of China or Tiananmen Square, the Taj Mahal and the Dharavi slum? Or what about Bollywood? The Iguazu Falls and the white beaches of Copacabana. Wow, there were so many amazing places to see, and I could tick them all off on my personal bucket list. And so in 2012, our journey began. It started quite logically, as you would imagine, with the B. We started with Brazil, although we didn't often and always follow the acronym. The trips were intense. They were fascinating. They taxed our bodies, and they certainly challenged our minds. We visited 14 separate cities, had 81 separate meetings, and went on 33 distinct tours. There is so much you can learn from a book or from the internet, but so much that one cannot. The noise, the smells, the taste, the food, and some unique travel experiences. So how else would we have encountered the following? To go to Moscow, we had a very important meeting we wanted to attend, and then the taxi driver said to us, we've just hit 9 out of 10 on the TomTom app, which means the city is almost entirely congested. He strongly suggested we got out the cab and walked very sadly back to our hotel. We missed the meeting. Or to set up a very important meeting with a senior Indian finance minister, after which 15 minutes later he threw us out. and yet spent their entire 15 minutes watching the TV set behind us and saying, to whatever question we asked, you can pick that up off the internet. Important lessons in these. Or to negotiate very fiercely with a taxi driver in Beijing. We'd done a journey in one direction, 2 hours later we're doing exactly the opposite. He wanted to charge us 4 times the price. You understand that Chinese are tough negotiators. The countries are large, they are complex, and in fairness, we got a very, very small taste of all of them and what they had to offer. But to understand them was even more challenging. And so we introduced 5 unique lenses that one can use to understand very complex countries. And there's one of those lenses that have really resonated with the audiences, and that was the concept of a national scar. Most countries have one, or some of them have more scars, a national nightmare, if you will. We feel it's really important to identify and understand the scar in terms of its impact on the country, the DNA, its history, and most critically, the impact on future policy decisions. In fact, I believe that the whole concept of scarring is an important and useful analytical tool. It applies not only to countries, but to corporates as well, whether that be a scar emanating from a major merger, a disposal, or takeover. And then what about us as individuals? What about our own personal scarring? Death, divorce, or major life disappointments. All of these have a real impact and they leave a real mark on you as an individual. It's a mark that needs to be understood and identified and accounted for. In the case of our very first visit to Brazil, we argued, perhaps controversially, that it was in fact hyperinflation that was their national scar. And there were consequences of such, which became clear to us. It's a fairly closed, non-competitive economy. It's prone to political and, in fact, military intervention in the economy. It thus has very high inflation risk. And with high inflation, its infrastructure has been neglected. And it needs to run very high real interest rates. Now, South Africa, in contrast, has a far more obvious past national scar, that of apartheid, but one that we clearly are still struggling to come to terms with. In addition, in our book, we identified a new national scar for South Africa, and that is unemployment, with all its associated woes: loss of dignity, high and unsustainable levels of social security grants, high crime levels, poor education, poor health standards, and so many more. Against levels of unemployment in all the other BRICS well below 10%, South Africa stands out like a sore thumb, with over 26% official unemployment and a much higher unofficial rate. The book calls on the South African government to subordinate all other goals and policies to this one. This is our national emergency. And unfortunately, we just don't sense that this is currently being seen as the case. But our journey didn't end there. We felt there was so much that we saw in the trips and wanted to capture that we couldn't, and we decided, therefore, to write a book. Now, the book project had to be completed into a very tight 9-month schedule. At the same time, I had a full-time job. So during the day, I had my job, and at night, we were writing the books. And it effectively took that full 9 period for our baby, our book, to be born. The ability to set a goal and achieve such with all the challenges that it presented was a critical learning for me. It's amazing what hard work, focus, dedication, and a supportive team can do. A very, very important life lesson. The trips and the related book were an absolute highlight of my working career. In the end, we decided to print 2,500 books. We launched them in Johannesburg, Cape Town, New York, and London. We sold the majority of the books in a 6-week period, raising over R1 million, and we put that to use to put 3 underprivileged South African students through university for 3 years, all expenses paid, something that we're very proud of. The book is entitled Halfway There, which we feel really aptly describes the journey of all those different BRICS. If I try to use a soccer analogy that might assist, we're at half-time. The scores are tied. The outcome rests entirely in our hands for the second half. We can still win this game, we can draw the game, or lose the game. But what you never want to do is lose the game by scoring an own goal. And yet that is exactly what most of the BRICS, South Africa included, seem intent on doing. It is not a recommended strategy. We then also analyzed all the BRICS from a World Economic Forum global competitive survey perspective and came up with the most unbelievable perspective on South Africa. South Africa is almost a schizophrenic country and in many ways unique amongst the BRICS, but I might argue amongst all the countries of the world. If we looked at the top 10 best and worst features, South Africa had the most unequal ranking of any country in the BRICS, and probably of the 140 other countries compared as well. So, for example, South Africa would rate either number 1 or very close thereto in many, many different areas. Better than the UK, better than Switzerland, Singapore, United States of America. For example, corporate governance, regulation of our stock markets, and many other areas that relate to our financial services sector. But equally and very disappointingly, South Africa ranks amongst the worst or near worst in the entire world when it comes to labor-employer relations, education, especially with respect to the quality of maths and science. So the book again proposes a challenge to government to set a target of improving South Africa's global rank by, say, 10 to 15 positions every 5 years. And we believe this is eminently possible and achievable. South Africa only has to follow a very simple strategy. A, protect and nurture the areas of strength. And B, improve the areas of profound and obvious weakness. And then finally, we summarized our findings into what we call South Africa's Big Five, as you must do in South Africa, but these from an economic and policy perspective. And these are they. Firstly, reduce unemployment, first and foremost. Secondly, generate sustainable, inclusive, and balanced growth. We need to grow. It is critical to grow. 3, focus and fix education. As a percentage of GDP, South Africa spends just about as much as any country in the world on education. It is just very badly spent on their other problems. 4, protect the rule of law, our institutions, and our property rights. And by implication, that means reduce corruption. Number 5, focus on the private sector, work with the private sector, and reduce financial repression. It's a complicated term, and it requires its own separate presentation. We feel very strongly that if South Africa applies these measures, then we're confident that South Africa will again grow, regain its luster, and enhance its global rankings. But if it does not, we will get a continuation of the current stagnation, or what we term a slow puncture. The choice to us seems pretty obvious. Let us all work together and ensure that South Africa chooses wisely. Thank you.
Why the BRICS and not the MINCs? And what's the difference between the two, in actual fact?
So again, Jim O'Neill actually coined both phrases. 15 years ago, he spoke about BRICS and MINCs, and BRICS were the biggest. These were the monsters of the world. 40% of the world's population. Then, the majority of world global growth was coming out of China had grown at over 10% for 30 years. It's never been done in recorded history before. The MINCs were much smaller, but would be the next group. And so we decided to focus on those countries that could make the most impact on the world, hence the BRICS. I actually do have on my bucket list to visit all the MINCs, and I recently returned from my first trip to Nigeria.
Oh.
Difficult story that, but we won't go into it now.
Another question is, you told me about you're into socially responsible investing. Yep. What really is that?
So at the end of the day, the world that I come from, the investment world, controls trillions of US dollars of assets. The financial service sector is enormous. And that money is not necessarily always put to use in the best way. You will remember the global financial crisis of 2007, 2008, the aftermath of which the government regulators clamped down on the sector in a very, very material way. A sense that the financial sector destroyed the global financial system, had ripped off clients, et cetera, et cetera. So what I tried to introduce from a position of quite a bit of power at Investment Solutions, I was the chief investment officer, and we managed 330 billion rand of South African assets under management. So we were the largest multi-manager in the country, and we used to work with managers and say to them, when you meet with corporates, ask them these type of questions. Are you thinking about the environment? Are you thinking about community? Are you thinking about the clients? Are you thinking about stuff other than just making the best return on investments or the most money that you can make?
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bomboni.